Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Chances are some of you dropped a child off at school today. Maybe you recently visited a loved one in a hospital. Over the weekend, you may have visited one of our provincial museums or the Calgary Zoo, where unfortunately there are no longer any pandas. But public infrastructure impacts Albertans every day, and their lives also are impacted every day, and that's why the legislation I tabled today matters to all Albertans. Bill 73, the Infrastructure Accountability Act, is a key component for furthering Alberta's recovery plan. It provides accountability and transparency for how the government invests in infrastructure projects that put people to work and which house the public services we rely on daily. We know that the demographics and technology change, and the government must build infrastructure today in response to tomorrow's needs. Since we are in Edmonton, I will paraphrase the great one himself, Wayne Gretzky. With the Infrastructure Accountability Act, we want to anticipate where the puck is going to be. The Infrastructure Accountability Act will drive responsible investment in capital projects that positively impact the Alberta's economic and social health. It does that by providing a set of objective criteria to guide how capital projects and spending are prioritized, identifying criteria to evaluate project priorities and suitability, outlining roles and responsibilities for government ministries involved in developing the annual capital plan, and formalizing a deputy minister's capital committee which provides advice on the capital plan. We are taking the politics out of good decision-making and relying on evidence-based advice when choosing which projects to fund. The Infrastructure Accountability Act is open and accessible to everyone. It ensures our government is being strategic in how it manages public infrastructure in the best interest of Alberta taxpayers. We know that every investment into public infrastructure furthers Alberta's recovery plan and fuels future economic growth, not only by creating construction jobs today, but by making communities more attractive for future growth. That's why the Infrastructure Accountability Act is good news for all Albertans, including government partners and job creators. Albertans will better understand how the government decides what capital projects to deliver in their communities, how decisions are made to ensure best use of every taxpayer's tax dollars, and how we align our capital project decisions in the best interest of creating jobs, supporting economic growth, and protecting the most vulnerable Albertans. Government partners such as school boards, post-secondary institutions, and municipalities will be better able to align their decisions about what they plan to build, knowing government's criteria and priorities, while job creators will better be able to form their business plans because of government's transparency around capital planning decisions. If passed, the Infrastructure Accountability Act legislates the release of a 20-year strategic capital plan, which must be updated every 4 years. This plan will provide strategic direction beyond the annual capital plan. It will be a key driver in making sound decisions in public infrastructure that will attract job creators and get people back to work. The plan will look at how capital infrastructure-related trends may impact Alberta, and considering those trends will provide long-term strategic direction and how government can best meet future infrastructure needs. I would like to thank Albertans, government partners, and job creators for their help in developing this act. Last summer, we had more than 3,200 submissions in response to our request to provide input into these important initiatives. And we heard strong support for legislating capital planning criteria and for providing transparency around the process. I was incredibly happy that in the middle of summer and in spite of the pandemic, we received so much feedback. Together, we are raising the bar for transparent, evidence-based decision-making to deliver on capital projects that provide Albertans with the infrastructure they need and that support jobs and the economy long into the future. I'll thank you. Now I'll turn out to Hayden if anyone in the media has any questions.
All right, we'll start in the room. Janet, go ahead.
Hey, it's Janet French from CBC. So a couple of years ago, you told me, and you repeated again today, that the goal of the act was to depoliticize the decision-making and make it more transparent. But the public will never see a ranking or whether each project actually meets all of these 6 criteria you're looking at. So can you explain to me how this bill would tell the public that the politics had no bearing on what projects are approved?
If I remember well, Janet, we were talking that time about the Grand Prairie project, and now I had the honor to finish the project, but I'm still dealing with the lessons learned and the impacts of that decision-making process that particular project went through. We have a few more examples like that. So since we took government in 2019, we certainly applied this criteria. Not that every project that's on the capital plan will meet all 6 criteria, but broadly, we piloted in the last 2 years all the projects we approved to go through that capital planning process with that particular objective criteria applied, and we approved those projects. And we were doing it in anticipation of introducing that bill today, which is today is a big day for us. So that in that process, once we legislated this criteria, the future governments can't ignore that anymore. So they had to follow that process. And when you say how to depoliticize, so one of the governance framework we put in this new act is we'll form a deputy ministers committee. And I came from private sector. When I took over this role, I was thinking, because I never dealt with public service employees, but I was so impressed with their work ethic and their professionalism. And last 2 years, at least, I got the benefit of counsel and advice from them in a very impartial way. So with that governance committee in place going forward, Albertans can rest assured this process will be depoliticized. And because now it's going to be legislated, future governments can't ignore that process.
Just to follow up, in your 2019 platform, you committed to legislation that would, quote, establish predictable funding levels for infrastructure projects. Why does this bill not do that?
Yeah, so that's an important question, but nowhere in the world, no other jurisdiction legislates project list or funding levels for a reason, because we have seen during the pandemic, we needed that flexibility and the agility to respond to the micro and macroeconomic trends, current economic situation, and future emerging trends. So I know Albertans may have genuine concern about that, but our government had a record now. When we took over office, we said we will adopt outgoing NDP's 4-year capital plan, which would ensure that we'll fund at that level as a minimum, which was about $6 billion a year. But if you look at our record in 2020, we spent unprecedented $10 billion. And this year, capital plan for the next 3 years, it committed funding at $20.6 billion. So we have a record to provide that level of funding. And in fact, during last year's pandemic, we used the opportunity to foster, when private sector was laying off people and there was no construction happening in Alberta, our government fast-tracked $1 billion spending in capital maintenance and renewal projects, which actually helped many rural communities, smaller communities, in strengthening their local economy, kept people working, and improved their way of life.
Just to interrupt you there, I mean, are you saying that promise was a mistake, that you shouldn't have promised a minimum level of infrastructure funding per year?
So this criteria we are talking about, the reason I mentioned about the spending, unprecedented spending, when we are doing that level of spending, Albertans naturally expect to have some transparency and accountability. So we applied that. That's what I'm saying. So there is some level of predictability because each capital plan cycle through the budget every year, we are approving these projects. So Albertans have a predictability now that utilizing this new legislated process would help them to get that certainty and predictability about project funding.
Actually, next we'll go to the phone. Sorry, I should have been clear off the top. We'll do one question, one follow-up. Could we get the first caller, please?
Thank you. Jeremy Thompson, CTV.
Hi, Minister. I've got the question sort of off topic here a little bit. I'm sure you're aware of a sort of an ongoing protest camp that's on the legislature grounds there. And today we saw police and sheriffs move in after receiving an injunction from the courts to have that camp removed. We do also know that some folks, most of the camp is gone now, but some folks are still inside a number of teepees down there at the moment. So I'm just wondering, what is your impression of the camp and its messaging, and what would you like to see as far as how removal is done?
Thank you for that question. I actually defend everyone's right for peaceful protest because that's one of the guaranteed and cherished Canadian charter right. As someone who was born outside of Canada, I have a particular appreciation for that right to protest particularly this legislature grounds. I've been calling this Temple of Democracy since I got elected. And those grounds, as Minister of Infrastructure, I'm obligated to keep it open and make it safe for all users, for everyone. In this particular case, and also if you look at my record in the last 2 years, I applied those rules, common sense rules, to all protesters, irrespective of the type of protest or cause of the protest. So having said that, in this particular case, so they have brought in, the teepees and tents, other things, and there were issues, and sheriffs had talked to them, and we had to call, fire services. On the legislature grounds, they have parked vehicles illegally, which was posing safety hazards to other users of the legislature grounds. So sheriffs talked to them, and my department team tried to work with them for almost a couple of weeks. But we ran out of we exhausted all options now. So now that court has given an injunction, and I'm glad that sheriffs have taken the action to evacuate that safely.
Jeremy, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just quickly, we know that there are sort of an undisclosed number of people still sort of holding firm inside the teepees. The rest of the area has been largely cleaned up. And from what I've seen down there today, the sheriff and the officers are, they're trying not to. It seems like they're trying not to use force on those folks. What do you see as a good? What would you consider a good resolution? Because obviously the injunction says that those folks in those teepees are not allowed to stay there.
Yeah, my understanding is the sheriffs have been discussing with them. I'm sorry it came to this stage because they have been warned, they have been issued fines. That is the process usually sheriffs undertake, and my staff have been working with them closely. But now it has become a safety hazard for many people. In fact, our officials are assessing now the damage on the ground, and because we had to clean it up so that all other Albertans can enjoy those grounds. So I hope through negotiations and dialogue they can come to a conclusion. But if they want to come and use those grounds during the day for a peaceful protest, they can still, the grounds are still available for them.
All right, thank you. We'll go back to the room. Audrey, votre question.
Yes. Hi, Audrey Neveu from French CBC. You're talking about your bill, we'll go back to that, as being the criteria leading to more transparency and accountability. However, if there's no overseeing body or anybody that Albertans who think that the government is not respecting those 6 criteria that they can go to, how does that encourage accountability if there's no one to enforce it?
Well, when you say enforce it, for example, there is an economic impact is one of the criteria. But for projects like schools and hospitals, safety and those kind of factors, they will determine those projects. So when you say enforce, our governance structure, they apply that based on the type of project, scope of the project. For health facilities and schools, it's not the return on the investment, but it's about the social impact. So depending on the type of the project, we evaluate the economic and social impacts and the job creation opportunities in the local communities. Those will be applied. So when you say enforce it, they'll be applied for sure. Otherwise, those projects won't make it to the capital plan and they won't be approved.
But from what I understand, it's up to the government to make sure that it respects those criteria. There is nobody else that can say you did not respect those, or at least most of those, because I understand they don't have to meet all 6 every single time.
So this governance structure I talked about, public service employees like the deputy ministers, they are there for a reason to go through that criteria. And in fact, as I said, this is a campaign commitment. We're trying to keep our campaign commitment. Albertans broadly approved it when we put that on our campaign platform last time. And in 2 years, they get opportunity to look at whether we executed the projects meeting that criteria or not. So Albertans have the oversight. So they can give feedback to all partner ministries, myself, on a regular basis.
But with all due respect, Minister, an election is very wide. How can you know if Albertans are going to the polls to say you did not respect the criteria in attributing funding to infrastructure projects? This will certainly get lost in all of this. So how are elections a good accountability measures on this specific measures you're putting forward?
So there are industry associations, there are advocacy groups. I meet them regularly. So far, nobody raised that concern with me. That's why I'm saying I haven't heard that from any of my stakeholders so far. They're all broadly supportive of that.
All right, I think we have one more question on the phones. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Catherine Brzykowski, Alberta Today.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. So you said the why for this bill is that it's to get rid of politicization, and yet you're saying voters will hold people to account. And I don't see anything in this bill that's kind of getting rid of that politicization. You know, when there's advocacy from a certain community saying, "Hey, build my school first." So how do you avoid that politicization that's gone on, where it wasn't necessarily based on need, the most urgent need, but on advocacy and communities pushing? How do you avoid that politicization?
Yeah, so there will be always demand for local infrastructure projects. In case of schools you used, there are school boards. That's another level of process that goes through. So the school boards, depending on the student population and growth in student population, they send those requests to the Minister of Education, which, Minister of Education work with the school boards and bring it to the Treasury Board and Finance through the capital planning process. So it has been working. It's whether that particular school in a given community is approved in that budget cycle they are looking for, or if that didn't meet that threshold limit for student population, probably it comes in the successive years. So, but the process has been working really well so far.
And do you have a follow-up, Catherine?
Yeah, in the platform you say the NDP have failed to deliver predictable funding or a transparent list of infrastructure priorities. So this bill has prioritization criteria, but we still don't have a list of which projects are in what order, so why not?
Yeah, no, fair enough. Just to have a list for the sake of having it, and then if those projects don't cut the list to the capital plan, so there's no point in having that. And as I said before, I haven't seen any other jurisdiction yet to legislate the project list or level of funding. So this is a good step overall. It's the right step in the right direction, and at least now we have this process to make sound decision-making process, which future governments can't ignore. You mentioned about NDP. They had 4 years to do anything better than this. And, honestly, I got the opportunity to introduce this, and we have been piloting it last 2 years, and it's showing the results. And last 2 years, we could get a lot of projects approved with applying this process.
All right, that concludes today's media availability. Thanks so much.